I'm pretty sure all of us have posted, tweeted, or blurted something out that we later regret. And despite our best efforts, that's likely going to continue. The real question, as in our opening scenario, is what we do when someone calls it to our attention, and how we handle the slip-ups of others. These days, many refer to the practice of publicly identifying slip-ups as cancel culture. But this term now means so many different things to so many different people that it has become an imprecise umbrella term that seems to trigger a different response in each person you ask about it. Some people think it's exclusive to progressive and radical leftist causes, but I have seen it wielded by conservatives and centrists alike. It just gets called something else when they do it. Some think cancel culture is a righteous cause that takes down the bad people who repeatedly do bad things. But I've also seen it take down individual people who made one-time slip-ups. And a third group, one that includes many of my wisest friends, claims that cancel culture doesn't even exist. They contend that it's simply consequence culture and people are just finally facing repercussions for their actions. But as hard as it is to disagree with my friends, I don't think this is true either. The consequences that people face are doled out unevenly, where some get harsher sentences than others. So while cancel culture may not be the right term, there is definitely a culture of something. The journalist Jon Ronson identified this years ago as shame, and he writes in the introduction to his book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, "We were at the start of a great renaissance of public shaming. When we deployed shame, we were utilizing an immensely powerful tool. It was coercive, borderless, and increasing in speed and influence." Now, how this immensely powerful tool manifests exactly varies. Sometimes it presents itself as the public outing of a transgressor for having done a bad thing in the past. Sometimes it looks like a swarm of vicious verbal attacks against a person who has committed a bad deed, and other times it can appear as a benign, even entertaining, flooding of a comment section with jokes at the wrongdoer's expense. But no matter how the shaming manifests, the purpose of each of these public shamings is to target a transgressor. With the speed afforded to us by social media, this tool of shame can be assembled at a warp speed to instantly be weaponized against wrongdoers. And if we consider shame as a weapon, it's assembled and operated by what I've begun to think of as shame armies. Now, these shame armies enlist soldiers at frightening speed, and they disband immediately after a shaming. They attract potential fighters by convincing them that the most socially conscious thing they can do is join in and pile on to the transgressor in question. In some ways, shame armies are really exciting. By coming together digitally, the voice of the people can be heard, allowing us to organize faster than ever before and take down powerful organizations and institutions that have held a terrifying amount of power for far too long. It's a modern twist on the classic understanding of collective action. But in many ways, shame armies are terrifying. Their aim can be off, and these misdirected strikes are way too often shrugged off as tough luck. Shame armies are, after all, seeking justice, or rather, what they think is justice. And by fighting for what's right on social media, where success is determined by the points accrued, they end up playing justice the game, where individual people become the targets on which we can score points. Shame, especially the performative style of shame we see online, where the more comedically we put someone down, the more points you receive, provides the illusion of change without the real thing. Plus, shame confuses the individual and the system, because somewhere along the way, in the noble attempt to criticize problematic systems and ideologies, shame armies end up targeting individual people instead. Human beings bleed. Ideas, like racism, homophobia, and misogyny, don't. So if shame armies are out for blood, why would they shoot their arrows at intangible concepts when they can feel the rush of seeing a symbol of those ideologies feel pain? Ultimately, shame dehumanizes people. It turns full, thinking, breathing, feeling humans into inanimate objects on which we can score points before dismissing them. Now, this is best exemplified by one of the popular terms that shame armies use to label transgressors: trash. By writing human beings off as disposable waste, we're contributing to this idea that one wrong move, one wrong mistake, can earn you a spot in the dumpster. Now, what does seeing this phrase aimed at human beings do to our understanding of others? And what does it do to our understanding of ourselves? Sadly, shame is not a weapon deployed by a small few. On the contrary, I believe that shame is our default. It is our go-to response to a transgression. As I've mentioned before, my initial instinct when receiving hate was to blast the people who sent me hate. I wanted them to feel shame for the pain they caused me with their hate messages. I tried this for a while, but then I stopped because I realized that the shame didn't actually give me any solace. By humiliating the people who sent me hate, I didn't feel any better about being called a nasty name or a homophobic slur or receiving a rude message about my appearance. Even to this day, I have to stop myself from instinctively resorting to shame when someone upsets me or when I see someone make a public mistake. And I study this stuff. I advocate for a different model of communication. I am an anti-shame advocate. And even I find that shame is my gut response to any wrongdoing that I observe. Clearly, we need an antidote to all of this, a reminder that the transgressors we target, or see being targeted, are human beings just like us. We have all messed up before, and by targeting people instead of systems, we aren't getting the justice that we think we are. If anything, we're perpetuating the problem and hurting more people in the process. Luckily, there is a solution. Calling out is to publicly criticize someone for wrongdoing. It is the star weapon in the culture of shame. Calling someone out can look like public humiliation, adding them in a tweet, or digitally swarming someone. Calling in, however, offers a more sensitive identification of wrongdoing. The term was popularized by the activist and professor Loretta J. Ross. As Ross wrote in a 2019 New York Times op-ed, calling in is simply a call-out done with love. Calling in can look like many things. It can be an email, a letter, or a private message. To me, calling in looks like a conversation. Now, conversations with people who hate me was not created as an antidote to shame culture. I didn't even consciously create it as an example of calling in. I just created it as a coping mechanism. Because by talking to my detractors one-on-one, I was able to see them as human beings and not these distant, faraway strangers who I was scared were out to hurt me. So we can gain something too by avoiding shame. The internet has a lot of people, and many of these people will mess up. They will say something wrong, they will do something that annoys you. So how can we move forward without calling everyone out? Do we have to call every single person in? Do we even have the time for that? Of course not. Instead, I suggest that we reconsider all the people we pass digitally, not as strangers, but neighbors. So in a physical neighborhood, we follow a code of conduct. We may be mad at the tenant upstairs, but that doesn't mean we bomb them with snarky gifts. We might even have an icy relationship with the shopkeeper next door, but we don't immediately post signs on their storefront calling them trash. We control ourselves in these situations because these are people we have to see every day and live beside every single day, which makes it easy for us to see them as full human beings, capable of good and bad behavior. And while that upstairs tenant may annoy us, we can also see them doing something super mundane, like picking up their mail. And yes, we may get weird vibes from the shopkeeper, but we also see them greeting a customer with a smile. This makes it easier to avoid the extreme behavior that we're used to on the internet, not because we are these noble angels, but because it's harder to dehumanize someone who you can't unsee as a human. What if we apply these same norms to how we see our fellow digital denizens too? It doesn't mean we have to love them all or call them in all the time. It just means that we have to find ways to mitigate the very real and natural conflict that may arise while also treating them like the people they are. Of course, this is super challenging because it's one thing to poetically suggest this, but it's quite another to practice it. And also, some neighbors can cause real harm. Seeing the internet as a neighborhood doesn't mean immediately absolving everyone of guilt. It just means determining which transgression you want to respond to and which you don't. Calling in, resisting the urge to enlist in the shame army, and reconsidering our fellow digital strangers as neighbors will go a long way towards helping us have more meaningful conversations. The next activities will provide some great practice.